All right, to continue a discussion about freedom of speech, it's important to discuss laws against material and speech that is considered obscene. The major question when it comes to obscenity or something, obscenity is basically something that a normal person would consider indecent and not a part of a cultural norm. So you have a question about what is obscene and what is art. And a lot of that is going to depend on the person, the time period, and where something is displayed. Um, so something that a person living in the city center of New York sees at a modern art gallery, and it could depict an image of a bunch of nude people in a pile. And the person in New York isn't going to necessarily think that that's obscene. They might view it as art, and since it's in a museum at the time or an art gallery, um, it wouldn't be depicted as obscene. But you put the same piece of art or a piece of work in the middle of Nebraska, um, you know, in front of a church, and people are going to be offended and consider it to be obscene. So that's really what the court has to consider when they're determining whether somebody's expression is art versus obscenity. Okay, a lot of controversy around obscenity deals with pornography, and a lot of women's groups, a lot of women's interest groups will fight pornography as a degradation of women, and it dehumanizing women. So you do get that argument too. Now, Supreme Court has been assigned trying to figure out what is obscene. Um, and basically, what the Supreme Court has decided is that really obscenity, pornography is not in the protections of the Constitution, and you can have laws that restrict access to pornographic materials. And they actually have established a test. In a Supreme Court case of Miller versus California, they established the Miller test. And the way I remember this is that California, you think of people in California being really racy. And like you think of Hollywood and stuff like that, and kind of helps me remember Miller versus California. But the Miller test, basically, the test is if something you take material and it shows something that is offensive, has offensive sexual context, and if the material lacks serious artistic, literary, political, or scientific merit, then it should be restricted. So there are things that may depict a nude body, but it could be used for scientific materials or scientific study. Or if you look at the Canterbury Tales has some pretty dirty stories in it, but it has literary value. Just artistic nudes, statues, and nude statues and things like that. That's considered of artistic value. So that kind of stuff is allowed. All right. Next, libel and slander. Okay. So the definition of libel is anything that is written down, a false statement, and the statement is intended to damage a person's reputation. So libel is literature, libel is written. Slander is the same thing. It is spoken defamation of somebody's character. So slander is spoken. Neither libel or slander are protected by the First Amendment. Because you cannot say something. So, for example, you cannot write something that is false about me as your teacher, and then I lose my job over it. I could sue you for libel, and that speech would not be protected because you tried to defame my character. I lost my livelihood over something false that you said, and as long as I could prove that what you said about me was false, then your speech is not protected. And that's definitely now it's definitely the case when it comes to public figures. But here is the kicker. If you are a public figure and somebody is saying something that is true about you and it defames your character, then tough. They can say it. So, like, if somebody says, this is not a real mayor that I know of. Mayor Grant um, is racist and um, likes to burn crosses in his backyard. And you publish that, and then the mayor gets kicked out of office in a recall vote. And then the mayor tries to sue you for saying that he's racist. But if you can prove that the man was racist and burning crosses in his backyard, tough. Because if he really did it, then your speech is protected. That idea was established in the court case New York Times versus Sullivan. Sullivan wasn't the police commissioner, but he was a public official in Alabama. And he was basically responsible for allowing Martin Luther King to be locked up without protections of writ of habeas corpus. So what happened is that the New York Times ran a full-page ad, and this is it, right here. And you can look this up on Google Images. It's Heed Their Rising Voices. It's actually pretty interesting to read this. But this is actually an advertisement, and it's trying to encourage people to petition the government to protect civil rights advocates and civil rights protesters. So, and it's calling out Sullivan for being a public figure that was violating Martin Luther King's constitutional rights. Sullivan sued the New York Times, saying that the New York Times was being libelous and that these were false claims intended to hurt his character. The Supreme Court said, "Look, you're a public figure, and the New York Times, what is being said is a true claim that you are suppressing the rights of civil rights protesters. So you really don't have a case here. So if you are a public figure, the only way that you can prove that somebody's been libelous is if you can prove that what is being said about you is being said with malice, which is harm, like just being bad, mean, and reckless disregard for the truth. But that was not the case here. So the New York Times versus Sullivan case said that public figures, to wrap it up, so that public figures have to prove actual malice in order to win a libelous case. But here's the good thing. This is a good just go to remember this. If you're lying, don't say it, because if you're lying, that's when you could get busted for libel or slander. And if you're criticizing, it's okay. Criticizing is good. Critiquing your government officials is a good thing. That's our job. All right. Commercial speech. I love this image. Like, how can you see this in advertisements, but this is what you really get? I kind of feel like this is a false advertisement here. I have never seen any of these products actually look like that when they come out of the wrapper. Okay, so commercial speech. This is a little bit more restricted. So the government actually does have more restrictions on advertisement than they do individuals' freedom of speech. Because this is speech for the purpose of profit, not for the purpose of preserving democracy, right? Okay, and it's really the role of the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Communications Commission. Both of these are regulatory agencies. So remember, regulatory agencies set rules for businesses to follow and enforce those rules. So the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, really is going to regulate what kinds of materials may be advertised on radio and television and regulates the content of advertising. And then the FCC is going to do the same thing. But the radio and television stations are going to be subject to more strict regulations than print media. So all stations, again, if you don't have complete freedom of speech, if you want to operate a television station or you want to operate a radio station, you do have to have a license and you have to comply with the regulations that include provisions for a certain percentage of broadcast time to be for like public service, news, and children's programming. This is also a review. Equal time has to be given to political candidates if you are operating a radio or television station as well. Okay, and last thing is U.S. versus Playboy Entertainment Group, and I didn't put this under obscenity, but you could kind of lump it into that as well. But this is 2000 Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court agreed that although the government had a legitimate right to regulate sexually oriented programming, any such regulation must be narrowly tailored to promote a compelling government interest. So, basically narrowly tailored to promote a compelling government interest. If the government is going to prevent sexually oriented programming, it has to be careful on the lines that it treads. So you you just you can't put a ban. I don't know, how would I say this. You can't stop everything that sexually like has a sexual connotation from being on the air. And you can kind of see that if you watch FX. FX gets away with a lot of stuff. Um, and I mean, like, even programming that, like Scandal, a lot of y'all watch Scandal. Scandal can be kind of scandalous. And this is always really awkward to talk about. Um, and that's allowed as long as there are viewer warnings, like, TV MA, like TV mature. um and the government can't overstep its bounds as far as that goes. All right, thanks for allowing me that last minute of awkwardness.